Next from Chicago, we attend a hearing of the House-Senate Joint Criminal Reform Committee, where Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel, alongside the Superintendent of the Chicago Police Department, Garry McCarthy, calls on state legislators to decriminalize marijuana possession statewide and to reduce the penalty from a felony to a misdemeanor for those caught with 1 gram or less of any controlled substance. Other issues discussed are how the city's police are working to curb prostitution and domestic violence and limit the drug circuit from the city to the suburbs. This runs about 1 hour and 20 minutes.
I want to thank you, all of you, for not only the two chambers working together across party lines, also to ask some tough questions, questions that haven't been asked before. I think if we all could say honestly that if we were had a legal pad out and we're starting to draft and write our criminal justice code, it wouldn't be what we have today. We may have disagreements with what it would be tomorrow, but it's starting fresh, asking hard questions, challenging assumptions. I want to compliment you also because in many ways, both the superintendent and Commissioner Diaz, obviously you all do know Superintendent McCarthy. I actually look at what we do in fighting crime in the city, reducing violence. Both the Commissioner and the Superintendent play essential roles. Evelyn plays a key role in making sure we're getting resources out on prevention, after-school programs, summer jobs, which is essential if you're going to see the reduction in violence and crime overall in the city of Chicago. And so while many times this whole discussion is held around policing, we try to take it from a holistic, comprehensive approach that will also affect the individuals in the communities where you see greater crime, and making sure that our kids and our families have alternatives which are essential to strengthening our neighborhoods and communities. You're asking an essential part that we also asked. And the reason I say that is, and not only asking essential questions, but also, more importantly than just the questions, challenging assumptions that are embedded in the criminal justice code today. Now, we have done certain things on redirecting our policing and community policing, making sure our police officers go from behind the desk to behind the wheel and are more involved in the community, actually putting more resources into prevention and after school. But part of the changes we have done, and since we've done that, let me just say this, our overall homicide rate was down last year to the lowest level since the mid-60s, and also crime, burglary, theft, robbery, auto theft, sexual assault are down each of the years, and overall down since about the early 70s. But we also made changes, and one of the things I want to talk about, which I think could lend support to areas that you're looking at too. In 2012, because too much time by officers in the criminal justice system was spent arresting individuals for low-level possession of marijuana, we gave the police officer at the scene the option for minor possession, the option to ticket. In the period of time in which we have done that, we have seen about 4,100, about fewer arrests in that area. We've also seen simultaneously a reduction in burglary, the crime most associated with narcotics and drug use. So I'd like to note that reducing incarceration you can also see simultaneously a reduction in crime. And it's time, in my view, in general, to free up our criminal justice system to address our real public safety challenges and build on the progress that's been made. Lowering sentences will help us do by freeing our resources on everything from police to prisons to the criminal justice system and the courtroom itself. And I think the state could look at what we've done in Chicago. We have some big lessons to learn, and then how to apply those lessons on a state level. First, we're proposing reduce the penalty for possession of 1 gram or less of any controlled substance from a felony to a misdemeanor. That will change not just the criminal justice system, not just the police time, so you'll save time and money, but it will also change that individual's lives. Somebody walking around with a felony, their employment, prospects, their job prospects, their lives are in a different trajectory than if they had a misdemeanor associated with them. In addition, I'm proposing a new state law to allow police officers the same judgment to issue tickets instead of arresting those who possess small amounts of cannabis marijuana. Under our ordinance in 2012, Chicago police officers have been allowed to issue tickets, or what we call administrative notice of violation, for possession of 15 grams or less. As ticketing has increased, arrests have decreased, and according to a recent study by the Chicago Police Department, the arrest rate has fallen steadily from more than 94% during the first 6 months of this effort to just over 68% in the last quarter. And last year we saw nearly 5,000 fewer overall arrests for low levels of cannabis possession compared to 2011. And again, as I said, in the same period of time, burglaries over the last 3 years are down 45%, a crime most associated with narcotics and narcotics use and possession. And since the ordinance was put into effect, police have issued 4,100 tickets for marijuana possession instead of arrests. So from police officer time, jail time, court time, a reduction, while we're also seeing reductions in overall crimes most associated with that type of drug or drugs. Also, racial disparities in the ticketing have essentially been erased, with all races for cannabis possession being ticketed at the same rate. Now, where we were when we started wasn't that. We made a change. It was a tweak as we were applying it, realizing that a state ID versus not having that as a requirement made the change so it actually leveled out across races. The state of Illinois is one of the few places in America where our incarceration rates are rising even as crime rates are falling. Each person held in the Cook County Jail costs taxpayers around $143 per day. And despite the expense in time and money, less than 10% of low-level narcotic cases result in guilty verdicts. And it's not just about saving taxpayers' dollars, it's also about saving nonviolent offenders from a lifetime spent in and out of the criminal justice system. Somebody with a misdemeanor on their record versus somebody with a felony has a different employment prospect and future ahead of them. And a felony conviction can slam the door on a person's future and can make it harder to get a job, go to school, apply for financial aid, and find housing. There are times when a felony conviction is no doubt warranted, but we have to ask ourselves whether it's too high a price for using drugs. This proposal will not solve all our problems for mass incarceration in Illinois, but for individuals charged with this crime, it will solve many problems. Now, this is in addition to other things we have done in this area. Is working with a number of you on the panel, we've also allowed juveniles the automatic expungement of their record. Again, consistent with the idea of that a misdemeanor or a clean record has a different future associated with than one associated with trying to get your record cleaned of an arrest, or more importantly of a conviction, when it was for minor issues. That is consistent with the idea of giving a person a different future and the opportunity for a different future if they make the right choices the rest of their life versus tagging them. And we used to force too many juveniles to go through the process where 17,000 to 18,000 were available of having their records expunged. Only 400 to 500 a year would take advantage of that, forcing about 16,000 to 17,000 young adults a record that was on their profile that actually had impact to financial aid, college, housing, and ultimately employment. 13 other states already have laws on the books similar to what I'm proposing today, and there is no higher rate of drug dependency in these states as a result of what they did when they made the changes. I actually believe we should change our sentencing policy and make it in line with our values. It's time to free up our resources for the truly violent offenders who pose a bigger threat to the safety of our communities and our neighborhoods. And it's time to allow police officers throughout the state of Illinois to keep their focus where it is most, keeping our children, our families safe from violence. Again, I want to conclude by thanking all of you for asking some tough questions, asking those challenging assumptions. I think the experience in Chicago as it relates to marijuana possession, giving police the The judgment and the ability to make some calls on the scene for minor possession has not only freed up resources, but allow us to apply our resources on a criminal justice or public safety to the areas that are affecting our neighborhoods and our communities, rather than for every other offense that is minor. And given where the criminal justice system is, the court system, the jail and prison population, and costs associated with it, I think it's a better application of resources to the true challenges, while actually making different judgments as it relates to minor narcotic possession. Again, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, is there anyone who wishes to offer, beside yourself, prepared remarks? No.
No.
Okay, with that, then we'll go to questions. Representative Raul, Representative Rebeletti, Representative Duncan, Representative Cassidy, Senator Nolan. Senator Nolan first as chair, and then we'll go to Representative Raul.
Thank you, Chairman Saluski. Mayor, it's an honor to have you here. Thank you for your appearance. And I have to say that I concur with your Andy Griffith approach to policing, asking yourself what would Andy Griffith do in some of these instances, and allow the police officer out there in the street who knows the situation better than anyone else to make that decision. But let me ask you this. Given that, you made the statement that although we're seeing a reduction in crime, incarcerations are up. Can you shed some light on that, please?
Well, that was as it relates to the state of Illinois. I mean, the way I look at it, and let me give you this data point. Senator, I would also like to say, before I fully answer your question, I didn't have Andy Griffith in mind when I was we were doing this, but I'm assuming you have a color TV now, so we'll go with that. So with a remote
It's only
control.
been a short while.
Yeah, okay.
We just acquired one.
So we've tried to take a holistic approach. Make sure our police officers who are there to provide public safety and throughout the city of Chicago and all our neighborhoods are focused on the challenges we face in providing that throughout the city and in different communities. We also try to do it and making sure, and the reason I want Commissioner Diaz here, is to make sure that you also understand prevention, after school programs, all the things that are investments in our youth play an essential role, especially between the hours of 3 to 6 and during the summertime, in providing public safety and building up our communities by investing in the individuals. But we've also then taken a look at what we did when the police officers were arresting individuals for minor possession of marijuana, something we had a chance to address. Now, overall, and I want to turn it over a second to Superintendent McCarthy, we have seen over the last 3 years a reduction in individual areas of crime. Overall crime is down. It's been down 45% in the space of burglary over the 3 years, but each area, robbery, burglary, auto theft, sexual assault, have seen year in and year out reductions. Yet in the state of Illinois, that's for the city of Chicago. You've also seen crime reduction in the state, but our incarceration rates are going up. And I think what you're trying to ask, and what I support, and what we try to do in the city of Chicago is related to the one place or the one narcotic we had control over, which is cannabis, marijuana, was focus our resources, primarily the police in this case, on the real challenges we had, because 15 grams or less of marijuana wasn't the challenge as it related to public safety. And we haven't seen any increase in burglary, which is a crime most associated, and in fact we've seen reductions, and more importantly, it allows our police officers to be focused on their time in the areas that we face challenges, which is in violent crimes and so crimes associated with guns. Garry?
So, and I'm hoping that the superintendent, thank you, Mayor, for that, but I'm hoping that you'll address how is it that we have an increase in incarceration?
Yeah, and I think I can, sir.
Thank you.
Crime reduction is not about putting more people in jail. It's about putting the right people in jail. And modern policing is really about systems management, honestly. It's not the top-down paramilitary organizations that we used to be. And the system needs to be designed to get the right people in custody and in jail. Not everybody, the right people. And with that, over the last 3 years, we've got a 14% reduction in the number of arrests that we've actually made. So that incarceration rate is not being generated by Chicago. Our arrests are down by 14% over the 3-year period, 11% from 2 years ago, and 10% from last year, while at the same time achieving those crime reductions at the same time.
So if I understand correctly, you're saying that the increase in incarceration is not due to policy here in the city of Chicago, but elsewhere in the state.
I'm not sure. I think there would have to be a little bit more study done, but it just doesn't seem to make sense that our arrests can be going down while at the same time, and we're going to be the lion's share of the state. I absolutely understand that.
That is a state, that's an observation.
Correct.
Reflective of statewide phenomenon. Not
Correct.
just simply locally. Very good. Thank you very much, both. Thank you.
Senator Raul and then Representative Rebeletti.
First off, thank you, Mayor and Commissioner and Superintendent, for coming to our committee and coming forth with some real proposals. I'm going to talk to you about the same thing I talked to the previous presenter about, is the politics. Our challenge, being the diverse state that we are, is that if we put forth your proposal in Springfield, we've got to deal with the regional, the partisan, the politics that'll say that we don't want to go soft on crime. And so, I mean, your voice is a strong voice to rally other local leaders in other parts of the state that may not have the same challenges and the same situation as we have locally, as is the voice of our local prosecutor, and reaching out to other prosecutors to advocate for this policy. Otherwise, it's just a good proposal that won't be able to advance in the General Assembly. I want to know your thoughts on that.
Well, Senator, well, first of all, let me say this. If I make the proposal and you all decide to move legislation that includes aspects of this, I'm going to lend my voice and push to it as part of a comprehensive recalibration of the criminal justice code. Because I think what you do will impact how we apply our resources and ability, from whether it's the courtroom, prison, jail time, police officers. We have seen it. I'm giving you kind of, I wouldn't want to say Chicago was a pilot test, but by doing what we've done, we haven't seen any increase in arrests. We've seen actually a reduction, and we've also seen a reduction in crimes associated with usually what is referred to as narcotics. I will lend my voice and support you in this effort, because I think you're asking, as I said up front, in the same way we have asked, hard questions, challenge built-in assumptions. And when you think about it, and I would say this, what are the challenges we're facing from a public safety standpoint? And is the low-level possession of narcotics really those challenges? I think there's alternatives to dealing with that. If you look at all the research, drug users are not thinking about penalties when they're using drugs or in possession of minor or small amounts of narcotics. I would say where you usually face challenges in the context of society and public opinion and then the political process, there are real narcotic challenges in the suburbs, different than what we're experiencing in the city. And I think what has traditionally been a city versus suburb or downstate, you can bridge that difference right now, given the challenges that are happening in downstate and in the suburbs. Two examples. One is heroin, and the other is in why am I thinking? I'm drawing a blank. Meth usage. And when you think of what police officers have to do dealing with those challenges from a larger standpoint or a different place, allows your police officer, your public safety departments, because our family and support services are part of that effort, is I think the right way to approach this. And so the short answer is, if you're looking for political support to make the politically tough decisions, you'll have the support of the mayor of the city of Chicago, as long as it's what you deal with. I mean, obviously we've got to work through a whole set of issues, but I will support that effort, because part of our effort here is to recalibrate and deal with public safety as the people in the city of Chicago are experiencing it versus where the criminal justice code is today. And those are not the same place. And if you make those tough decisions, as the mayor of the city of Chicago, the largest city in the state of Illinois, I will lend my support. And again, details though matter.
Understood. Let's shift to the other side, which is Commissioner's side. I appreciate your efforts to take a comprehensive approach and not just a criminal justice approach to dealing with the violence challenges and just community challenges in the city. One of the things that the recent Auditor General's report on the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative has highlighted is something that's not being talked about in the media or elsewhere is capacity building with our community-based organizations. So a lot of community-based organizations are being characterized as either criminal or inefficient because they haven't had access to capacity building. I had a recent conversation with the folks from the Office of Civic Engagement at the University of Chicago, as well as with Terry Mazzani at the Chicago Community Trust, about trying to do something, not to just dump on all of these organizations as the media has been doing, but to build up these organizations in order to do something about offering real alternatives to our young people out there. I wonder what your thoughts are.
Well, Senator, first of all, I think you're asking an excellent question. I will just say this: we could do a whole nother panel and on this. In this sense, whether it's after school, summer jobs, and those are both focused on because summer is a particular challenging time, and the hours between 3 and 6 are a particularly challenging time for our kids. Making sure that our kids, our families, and the organizations that support that, whether it's the YMCA or neighborhood churches we've just recently done with the Safe Haven effort and really expanded it, are essential in providing our kids a safe place to go while either their parent or parents are still at work. And those organizations, we could not function as a city without the support of those organizations, both to provide the kids and being developed and ingrained, and not only developed, but basically entrenched and ingrained in the communities that they serve. And I do appreciate, because as you didn't say this, but my assumption is that those organizations are being painted with a broad stroke when individually across the city of Chicago, and I can't speak outside, we can't think of servicing the kids of the city of Chicago. Now tonight I'm going to After School Matters annual event. We have dramatically as a city increased our investments not only to After School Matters, but after school activities. You cannot get from here to where we're going as a city, making sure our kids are safe, if it wasn't for those organizations either at the school, near the school, in a church, to provide our kids the safety they need. They also help make the investments you need in the neighborhood by both through employment and other types of stability that are essential. Not all organizations are as great as After School Matters, but a lot of them are against a great deal of headwind of other economic, cultural, and other issues, are doing tremendous work, not only stabilizing our neighborhoods, but providing a place of employment, and most importantly, a mentor for our children who can teach them right from wrong, keep them safe, and learn about either athletic, academic, or artistic capacities they have in realizing their full potential. And we work with a cross-section, and I don't want to take from Evelyn her opportunity to address this. There are organizations throughout the city of Chicago that well serve our communities, and most importantly, they well serve our kids.
Thanks, Senator. So I'm Evelyn Diaz, Commissioner of the Chicago Department of Family and Support Services, and among many things that we do after-school summer job programs for youth, as the mayor said, but we're also responsible for administering reentry programs for adults and services for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and exploitation. And I said this on a panel that I was on a couple of weeks ago, a reentry panel that the Representative Zalewski was on, that on the other side of this proposal that the mayor is making is what we're saying is, you know, if we take the money that we are spending on incarceration of low-level offenses, and we instead invest those in more public safety and more prevention programs. One of the first things that you're going to come up against is the capacity of our current service system to absorb and continue to absorb that much traffic and continue to deliver at quality. So I'm glad to hear that you've been talking to folks locally about this capacity building issue. We're interested in as well. I would like for the city and state to come together on that issue to resolve it. I think there are lots of different solutions, good solutions, so that we're strengthening the organizations that the mayor was talking about, because they are doing great work in the communities. They're just not great at the paperwork. They're not great at, following every single rule that we have in our very thick contracts with them. And so we don't want to punish them. We want to lift them up and build them up. I think that's our commitment. We would really welcome the opportunity to work with the state on that.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Rebeletti, followed by Representative Duncan, then Representative Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Mayor, Superintendent, Commissioner. Thank you for being here. Mayor, you touched on the suburban issue of heroin, and being from Elmhurst and representing a suburban district, I can tell you about the plight of when one DuPage County resident every 8 days dies from a heroin overdose or opioid overdose, and the countless overdoses that the media doesn't cover, but I'm sure goes into the hundreds, if not into the thousands. I guess the former narcotics prosecutor in me doesn't die out very easily, so one of my concerns is if you take the possession and make it a misdemeanor, the possession of heroin, that it makes it easier for drug dealers to sell in smaller amounts. That way they'll carry less amounts. Because I agree with you that we want to focus our attention on the dealers, the cartels that are moving everything through this city. And obviously this is probably more of a superintendent question. How does that free up then resources, or how does that help you go after the dealer and to go after the drug markets and get to the bad actor?
Well, thank you, Representative. I guess the short answer to that is, if the officers don't have to process that arrest as a felony, and they can issue a different type of arrest packet, they're going to be out the door addressing these other issues. We focus on narcotics enforcement, as you know, on markets of dealers. We don't do that big net of locking everybody up for low-level narcotics to reduce crime, and that's why our arrests have been going down. Unfortunately, I guess part of the issue is the way, if the system is designed to put people in jail for narcotics possession, it's working. And I'm not sure what the state numbers are, but I know in Cook County, the number of folks who are incarcerated based upon low-level narcotics possession far outweighs persons who are incarcerated for violent crime. And that's why we endorse it. But by the same token, studies show that locking people up for low-level amounts of narcotics does not dissuade them from using narcotics. We know that. So it's almost an exercise in futility.
And with this proposal, Mayor, I'm sorry,
I'll figure a way to answer it.
Is there going to be some type of treatment requirement? Because now we have a misdemeanor. Now the case can be resolved pretty quickly. A lot of times it might just be a fine-only situation, and the person has this misdemeanor disposition. Is there going to be a person from Elmhurst with a heroin problem? Obviously, a misdemeanor is not going to persuade them to stop using right away either. Is there going to be a treatment component to follow up with these people that have now been processed by a Chicago police officer?
Well, that question actually is where I was going to take my former answer. As Henry Kissinger used to say, does anybody have any questions for my answers? And we can kind of go from there. But I mean, this is something for you to do. I would advocate, I mean, you have, obviously you're dealing with the criminal justice side and recalibrating to make sure the criminal justice side reflects our real challenges on public safety, not ones from the past. But obviously if you free up and change some of the areas, you will see resources available that today are tied up in a criminal justice system that's dealing with low-level or minor possessions that with less than 10% going to conviction. I would strongly support using those resources, while we have other challenges, at least some percentage being applied to treatment. And I would, and then, to be honest, this Senator does address your question in the sense of building a political coalition to withstand challenges. You would see folks in the suburbs who are facing certain, yes, okay. That's a whole nother panel meeting. That would be facing where that pressure would come. And to be honest, Representative, as a former prosecutor, I think your voice on this saying resources towards treatment, so prosecutors are not dealing with small offenses, using their time for the real challenges, and those other resources dealing with treatment to get people off of a drug habit. It would be a way of recalibrating and dealing with our public safety in the way it should be dealt with, both for the individuals who have minor possession and prosecutors and police officers and courtrooms and prisons focused on what are the real challenges as it relates to public safety, which is gun violence.
Superintendent, I was just in a conference in D.C. regarding information sharing, and there's work with the National Governors Association to have a uniform computer system that anybody, your officer all the way to DOC to treatment facilities, would be able to share information through a program like NIBRS or iClear. And obviously you have the largest police department, you're going to have the most contacts with individuals. Is your department going to be committed to working with us in a partnership so that people have more information throughout the entire system, so that we can share information and have better outcomes and more information for prosecutors and judges and people in DOC?
Yeah, I can guarantee that would be one of our major priorities, because any system designed to address crime has to depend on intelligence, where crime is happening, who's committing it, when, where, who, how, and why. So that's a major component of modern policing, and I am certainly not just open to it, I'm an advocate for sharing information and across lines. So yes.
And Mayor, the proposal is for decriminalization under 15 grams, or is it for possession of cannabis, or is it decriminalization of any personal amount up to, our statutes go up to 30 grams?
One is on cannabis for the state to do what the city of Chicago has done. Leave it to the police, as it relates to 15 grams or less, leave it to the police officer for their judgment whether they want a ticket or not. And then in addition to that, for other 1 gram or less on controlled substances, to lower it from a felony to a misdemeanor.
And so under 15 grams, there would not be an arrest option. There would just simply, the officer could choose to
Ticket for low level, yeah. Just like we give that judgment call to the police officer on the scene.
I know that in Elmhurst, the officers have the opportunity. It's a home rule county, a home rule city. So the officer already has the opportunity to write an ordinance violation and or make an arrest. What has driven officers to write more citations in Chicago? Because I know that there was an issue early on that there was more arrests than there were citations. Was there education of officers? How did that dynamic change?
Part of it was education and getting people to understand not only how to do it, but what the goal was, which was to keep officers on the street. But the second part was really a technical issue where you weren't eligible to receive a ticket if you did not have a government ID. And what we found was the largest category of folks who were not getting tickets, who were getting arrested as a result, was because of not having a government ID. So we kind of lightened up the stringent policy on government ID and whether or not they could be properly identified. And we opened it up, and as soon as we did that, more tickets were issued. The racial disparity was eliminated, and it's basically across the board, almost a third, and a third. It was really phenomenal to watch it happen.
Thank you all for being here. I appreciate your proposal and look forward to continuing discussions as we move forward. Thank you.
Representative Duncan, followed by Representative Cassidy, Neckritz, and Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, honored guests, for being here. I have a number of questions because, this is my city as well, and we want to see, myself in particular, how great the attributes and assets of this city can continue at a higher and better level. So it's important for us, quite frankly, for a commissioner like yourself, Commissioner Diaz, to be successful. Yourself as well, Mr. Mayor. Superintendent, you know, I've had issues with some of your policing strategies and policies because it's been a real challenge on a lot of our communities, and particularly our black communities on the west and south sides. But I'm just curious, you know, for the sake of solutions here, the City Council has already provided, you know, for people to be arrested or who are in possession of medical or marijuana in this case, but disproportionately, those individuals on the south and west sides, those predominantly black communities and brown communities, have been arrested. Is the sole reason based off of government ID? I'm trying to understand how and why this dynamic is happening, and sort of what are our next steps to help circumvent the disproportionate number of individuals who are black and brown being arrested and having a record on their behind their names.
Well, Representative, the goal of issuing tickets was twofold, was to keep officers on the street and not to give people criminal histories for low-level cannabis possession. As I already stated, the largest disparity in the original policy was a government ID. And where were those arrests taking place mostly? They were on the south and the west side. So when we changed that policy, those numbers have now fallen off to levels across racial lines. It eliminated the racial disparities.
So if I'm arrested for possession of marijuana, does my arrest record stay on the books?
I don't understand the question.
If I'm arrested, for example, in California,
If you can get it expunged.
right, but it's not automatically expunged.
I don't know. I'd have to consult some attorneys
It's
to find
not.
out.
I guess my point is with that, if I'm arrested, that's on my record. It's not automatically removed. That's still a potential detriment to me going to college, getting a new job, because there's a highlight, there's a box, if you will, on an application that says, "Have you ever been arrested?" And if you say, "Well, I was arrested and I was held for 6 hours," but the box is, you know, do I still check that box? I'm still marred to some extent. Whether I'm knowledgeable or not to get it expunged, the arrest is still there, and it's for marijuana.
Well, I just want to be clear, Representative. This was our change in policy to change that dynamic.
I thought City Council
this is
already had
something-
this policy.
No.
I thought they passed that about a year and a half or so ago.
That's correct. That was the mayor's policy to address this particular issue that you're referring to. So the previous policy had it that you got arrested. We changed it, the mayor changed it with the city council a year and a half ago, so that that dynamic goes away.
Can I speak to kind of a larger, take a step back if I can, Represent? There's 3 or 4 things that we have done on kind of recalibrating the criminal justice system so folks that don't need anything on their record can get on their way. First and foremost, the option to a police officer on the scene for minor possession of marijuana to ticket. And we've given you the data there, both on the ticketing side, but I also add the burglary side, which has seen reductions, because I think that's a very important part of that story. 2, working with a number of you, last year having our juveniles have their record automatically expunged rather than going through the legal process of trying to do it, because the automatic includes about 17,000 versus those who've taken the initiative, which in the past was around 400. Third, a major effort with our public employment areas like the public transportation of ex-offenders getting jobs so they can prove their worthiness and their responsibility. Fourth, a tax credit for hiring ex-offenders. In every which way, we have done something to get people on the right track, get their records cleaned up, not get them an arrest record in the first place by having a ticketing. And the proposals we're making today are consistent with that effort. Not once, not twice, but over multiple different areas. And the City of Chicago, through the Public Transportation Authority, but not limited to, has been a major employer for those leaving prison to get on their way, having made different set of choices for themselves. And that employment is both a job If you don't want, as I often believe, you don't want an ex-offender to become a repeat offender, there's nothing like employment. Not just as a paycheck, but it actually proves that they have returned as a citizen, having done their time, and now have a different set of values and a different judgment. So both from marijuana, where we have an ability to make a statement, we've done it, and when I say statement, we made the changes. 2, for juveniles, the expungement, that's automatic. 3, employment opportunities in the public sector. And 4, working with the senator that's not here, a tax credit for employment. And I suppose 5th, we've also now embarked with public housing, allowing some individuals, it's a pilot program, ex-offenders into public housing, which is also another detriment to the reentry. So in every aspect, we've tried to recalibrate where we could the criminal justice system, 1, for the resources to be dealing with the public safety challenges we have, and 2, helping those who do get in time not to be entwined or entangled in the criminal justice system in the first place. And if they do make the changes, they have a better prospect, whether it's financial aid, employment, or other aspects, as you've addressed, that, to be honest, I share those concerns.
Right. And we actually we passed several of those measures already. You actually have some members here who fought and voted against them. So I'm glad to see that we're on the same page in that particular direction. I'm curious to understand that this committee's charge, as you know, is to come up with solutions. And I've encouraged our leaders and members here to have those folk in front of us to be a part of that solution. So you're going to be pretty soon getting a draft. All of you are going to be receiving a draft, and we're going to solicit the best practices on how it is that we can come up with an efficient and smart crime piece of legislation that gets the bad guys off, and work with those individuals who are amenable to change. But if this legislation does not have mandatory minimums in it, as you've advocated for, along with your superintendent, would you be in favor of supporting it?
Well, as I said to Senator, your colleague in the different chamber, I want details matter, and I'm going to look at the whole bill. I believe this is the first step, though, is dealing with their narcotics piece, or the drugs possession, as we're talking about. But I do want to see focus on dealing with the violent crimes that are in the city of Chicago. I don't know. I can't answer a question about a hypothetical piece of legislation.
Well, the purpose of the reason that this committee was formed was because of your insistence and your superintendent's insistence on mandatory minimums. Where clearly across the nation, in places like Texas and Georgia and Florida and New York, hasn't worked. There's empirical data all across the board from professors, even here at the University of Chicago, not the ones who are on contract with the Chicago Police Department, but those who are objective in their analysis and assessment of mandatory minimums across the state, across this country, prove without a doubt they don't work. So if that measure is not in this particular legislation, would you support or be in favor of this legislation?
I already addressed that in the sense that I do believe in, as somebody who's fought for the Brady Bill, the assault weapon ban, in penalties and legislation as it relates to gun crimes, and it's different pieces as it relates to gun control. But I know what you're doing here, and I support the first step is recalibrating the criminal justice system overall to dealing with areas that I think are not part of our public safety challenge, but as taking a comprehensive approach. And when you come up and work through, one of the things I'm going to do is work with you on the legislation that I think would address the challenges the city of Chicago in particular is facing to make sure that we address it. But I don't know where the legislation is, and my guess is, if I can finish, my guess is none of you know where it's going, which is why you're doing a preliminary set of hearings.
Well, some of us have a better sense than you can believe or want to believe. But, thanks to you and your superintendent, we have this particular committee, bipartisan and joint. I'm curious to understand, I know when you first came in, you were going to hire additional police officers. Where are we with that today? Is that still a reality that we here in the city can look forward to?
One of the first things we've done is 2 parts of it. Is about a little over 400 officers that used to be behind the desk are now actually behind a wheel policing the communities and neighborhoods of the city of Chicago. And just recently through the summer, we did an additional set of officers from behind the desk doing administrative functions to now doing work in the neighborhoods and communities. The second iteration of that effort was making sure that through our impact zones, there's about 20 areas in the city, 3% of the city's geography, and the way to think about it is about 20 areas, 20 blocks each, variation. 3% of the city's geography was creating, both through murders, shootings, and robberies, almost about 20 to a little over 20% of all those type of crimes. So we've saturated them with additional officers. They're in both predominantly, but not limited to, the south and west side. And those areas, while the overall city has seen a reduction in homicides to mid-60 year, 1965, overall crime rates are down to the 1971 or 69. Those areas have seen a bigger drop than any other places. And we have saturated those areas so to free up the districts, like the 6th district, like the 4th district, like the 5th district, like the 11th district on the west side, like the 15th district. They have seen the resources in the district be applied to other parts of the communities and neighborhoods, and officers are now in those very areas.
So, Mr. Mayor, so the answer is no, you haven't hired new police officers to address this issue.
No, we've. I said what we said, and I will continue. Representatives have said is we've taken the officers. We've both through overtime as well as reassignment put more officers on the street in the city of Chicago and reapplied them in the areas, because before we do more, the very effort, we had to make sure officers who were doing administrative functions, they were trained to be police officers. And 480 officers, or around 480, could be 450, I don't have the exact number, they were in buildings. They're now on the streets patrolling neighborhoods of the city of Chicago exactly as they were trained to do. And we've also saturated communities with the overtime and through the impact zones and doing these jobs we're doing. And so we actually have had, I think also through the process, we've literally over 1,000 new officers have been sworn in.
Oh, we're past 1,000. We've hired more than, I think it's around 1,200 officers during the mayor's tenure.
Okay, now I don't want to mislead.
Representative, we have 4 more. I have some questions, so just
Mr.
one more
Chair.
question, Mr.
Well,
Representative.
He's taking taking up our time. We're taking up his time.
I
We're here.
understand.
He's here to address us. He was the reason that we had this committee formed, right?
I understand.
We
I just
opposed his
wanna-
minimum wage, his minimum mandatory sentencing bill, and we formed this. This was the agreement, and now we're trying to.
I hope you don't oppose the minimum wage.
Of mandatory minimums. So, speaking of overtime, how much have you spent just last year in overtime? I'm hearing numbers of $100,000, $1 million. Where are we with the cost of overtime of officers? How much was
the
it?
up-to-date numbers with us. Last year, I think we went past $90 million.
Wow.
And, if this is a dollar and cents issue, there's studies that show that every murder costs society about $5 million. But we don't look at it as far as a dollars and cents issue, because you can't put a value on a human life. It's cheaper to pay an officer overtime than to hire a fully loaded police officer, because the benefits and all the packages that come behind it actually cost more money. So it's a more efficient way of putting money into crime reduction. And in the mayor's, well, I don't have to speak for the mayor, but in the conversations that we've had,
I thought you always speak for the mayor.
It was very clear that it's not a dollars and cents issue, saving lives.
Well, you can look, it's relative. The reason that we're formed here is because it's costing the state a disproportionate amount of money that we're taking from health care for after-school programs, for health services, et cetera. So some of us will look at it a little differently. I think if you're spending over a certain threshold, $100 million, and burning out overtime, with overtime, existing officers who work a shift, then they do another half a shift or a full shift, you can argue a little differently. I think if you hire more officers, as you committed when you first came to the city, you would see sort of a different relationship in some of these communities as compared to just burn out the same ones. And I don't think that's responsible. I think if we go ahead and bite the bullet, if you will, and hire new officers, you can see a graduated difference as well. And, for the record, a lot of us don't buy or believe, the crime reduction as it relates to some of these communities in the black and brown areas. I noticed the way that you patrol now, you patrol Michigan Avenue with 4 or 5 men on each corner, and then you have a rolling patrol. Why can't we do that in some of these crime-infested areas where we're having real problems? How is it that, the shootings, the killings are constantly in this direction, but yet when you talk to, I guess, the media in certain audiences, there's an overall reduction because you're putting out the stats.
Okay,
I'm not sure if that's
Executive-
based off of how you're classifying some of the criminal components of or incidences. So can you explain, the difference between spending $100 million compared to hiring new officers outside of an efficiency component? How does that make sense for us in the city who are expecting new support or new police officers, to add to reducing, to help reduce our particular criminal situation here in the city?
And Mr. Mayor, I'm gonna ask, can we go to my questions after this last question, just so we can be accommodating everyone
Can I
in the
just
committee?
say one general point? 2 points I would say. One is, obviously, and the superintendent can speak if he wants to elaborate on this. One is, all the data is consistent with the criminal justice as it relates to the FBI criminal code. So we supply that. It's all there. Fact is, there has been a reduction in overall homicides, and it's down now to the 1965 level. And in each area, we have seen year in and year out reductions on average around 14–15%. And even specific areas has been greater. We can get you the charts and do that. Second is, since you're using the analogy of Michigan Avenue, that whole idea of the impact zone and the saturation in the neighborhoods, 20 different zones, primarily in the minority communities of the South and West Side, is modeled on the same idea of overwhelming saturation. Michigan Avenue had that saturation as we dealt with youth that were coming in and committing not so much crimes, but creating a disruption. That saturation on Michigan Avenue has actually had an impact in reducing that. And that same strategy and tactic has been adopted in 20 different communities, 3% of the geography, driving 20% of the overall crime rates as it relates to shooting, policing, and robberies. So that strategy and tactic that you identified that you liked on Michigan Avenue was exactly what we're applying in the neighborhoods throughout the city of Chicago, where you're seeing a greater reduction than the overall city numbers.
Well, it's my
Can
final
I-
question, Mr.
okay.
My final question. I'm just curious. Crime, when you travel to Boston, California, out of the country, you hear of Chicago's crime stats or the presence of crime. Because that's the first thing that comes to their head. And I love the city. I love the state. And again, I want to see this city and state succeed. But that criminal component is real. I mean, it's a real significant issue in terms of perception, even with conventions wanting to come here and folk wanted to come here and move. So your superintendent has been here with us for almost 4 years, as long as you have. With the level of carnage and murder and mayhem in the black and brown communities, if that level of activity was occurring in Ravenswood, where you live, in the Lakeview neighborhood, where others live, in certain parts of our city that are not used to the Lincoln Park, where I went to school, I mean, how would you rate him doing his job?
Well, Representative, let me, first of all,
You know how I feel.
really, I couldn't tell. Thank you for helping the subtlety. Let me address you this way, if I could, Representative. And I think he's doing a very good job. And so let me address, though, the overall city, since I'm the mayor. One is, last year, Chicago was #1 city for new corporate relocations, creating jobs and economic opportunity. Number 2, as just recently as Friday, Chicago was the #1 city for people moving back into. In the decade before I became mayor, the city of Chicago had corporations and people leaving in record numbers. Of the 200,000 people that left between 2000 and 2011 and 2010, 189,000 of them were African American. The overwhelming amount of people that left the city prior to my tenure as mayor were in the African American community. Number 3, since I am the person that also reorganized McCormick Place in our convention industry, Chicago went from 5th prior to me being mayor to 2nd, because we reorganized the marketing and we were actually signing new contracts. And I was just at McCormick Place the other day for all the international tourism. So both from companies moving here, people moving back into the city where we led the country, and convention business, which is now north of $5 billion we signed since we reorganized McCormick Place, and the city of Chicago moved from 10th on international tourism to 9th. Every one of the metrics that you're worried about, we've actually addressed. And if we do our job in recalibrating the criminal justice system, we'll continue to build on the progress of what we've done on public safety. And I'm happy to have your participation in continuing Chicago not 1 year being the leader in the corporate relocation, but 2 years in a row. I'm happy to have your help in the city of Chicago continue to be the #1 city people moving back into, rather than have the decade prior to us, when you were still representative and I was working in the White House, where Chicago led the country in people moving out. And I'm happy the city of Chicago replaced Las Vegas as now #2 and on the heels of Orlando as a top destination for convention business in the city of Chicago, and moved from 10th to 9th in international tourism, which is $1 billion more of economic activity and 26,000 new jobs in the tourism convention industry. So at every metric that you're worried about, which I share, Chicago is now either #1 or moved up in the rankings because it has done its job of doing the tough things and addressing the tough problems.
Mr.
And as it
Mayor.
relates to the public safety, Chicago's record will get out, and while it may be an issue of perception, the perception I care about, while I do care about around the country, first perception is to make sure a parent feels the safety of their kids being able to walk to school, to have their children walk to school. And that's the perception we've got to work on every day, and making sure our police officers, public safety, safe passage workers, everybody's doing their job to protect our neighborhoods, our communities, and most importantly, our children.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, if I could ask a question. There was, I think, one way to describe it is cathartic. I don't know if there was another way to describe it, but king of the non sequitur, so I'm going to move on to the issue of prostitution and domestic violence. Again, this committee is about reform. It's less about what happened in the past. And a few weeks ago, advocates of sexual abuse victims came to me and asked me if I could visit upon you and your staff the disproportionate share of Johns arrested versus prostitutes arrested. And my request to you is if you could work with the commissioner to make sure that the advocates have a seat at the table if there's a contemplated effort to rework our prostitution ordinance. As you know, I drafted a bill, or I sponsored a bill, I didn't draft it, that reduced penalties for prostitution, actually made it a misdemeanor, which is a good boilerplate for what we did here, what we're trying to do here. And our hope is that we can build on that success at the city level.
Sure. Obviously, Evelyn, you can address, but I want to make one other point. Go ahead.
Well, Representative, first of all, I think the short answer is absolutely. We would be happy to sit with advocates. In fact, we, the police department, my department, are already active members at the Cook County Human Trafficking Task Force, where law enforcement works together with social and legal services organizations on human trafficking cases. But not only are we at policy tables and having those dialogues, which we're happy to do more of, we're also investing in programs that are tackling the issue from the prevention side and the intervention side. We know, for example, that traffickers and pimps target girls who've experienced high incidence of child sexual abuse, and they start doing that as early as age 14. And that's why we've invested in nearly $1 million annually to fund the Chicago Children's Advocacy Center to serve child victims of sexual assault. Last year, the mayor then increased that investment by $9 million to expand their facility, which is going to create more space for mental health, community training, and services for kids traumatized by sexual abuse. So that's the prevention side. On the intervention side, we fund the Christian Community Health Center's Footprints program. They provide services to over 400 clients a year who are currently involved or have been involved in the sex trade. And then in addition to that, the Wings domestic violence shelter that we're currently constructing on the southwest side of the city is going to have housing available for survivors of trafficking. So we're definitely invested in this. We're at the policy tables along with the Chicago Police Department, but if the advocates that you spoke to want to sit down and have further conversations, we're really open to doing that.
Representative, I'd add 2 points. One is The short answer is, the Commissioner just said, is yes. Specifically, though, to domestic violence, we've, about 2 years ago, the last budget, we, starting a first new shelter in the city of Chicago in over a decade. It will also provide specifically for mothers with children, which is a big problem in the shelter community. You should know, all of you, about 25,000 calls a year to 911 deal with domestic violence. It's like one of the #1 calls we get from an emergency standpoint. So dealing with domestic violence, having assistance from the federal, from the state government in resources. As somebody who worked on the Violence Against Women Act, which we just commemorated the 20-year anniversary, would be extremely helpful to the city. This has, unlike other issues, there is no racial or income disparity here. It affects all communities, all parts of the city, all parts of the state, for that matter. We're building our first new shelter. We started a pilot project in the 14th Police District as it relates to police officers, their training, how they deal, because they are the first ones on the scene. We've added 3,000 individual cases where we can assist the woman, girlfriend, or wife in handling the court experience and how to pursue their independence. So at any level, while I know the first question was dealing with, obviously, sexual trade, but as it relates specifically to domestic violence, having worked on this for years, we would love the participation and help at multiple different points by the state in helping us see the type of reforms we're doing here and the resources we're applying go further.
One more brief question, and then we have 9 members with 1 question apiece. This message is for.
Oh, I was at 9. I was like,
no, 9. I'm
I
sorry.
feel like I'm in Jeopardy, U.S. history for 2 minutes.
Superintendent, I think Representative Rebolletti, he asked me to answer his question about the concern about the drug, what are called the drug markets on the south and west sides, and the corridor that's developing between the suburbs and those areas. And we passed a RICO bill a couple of years ago that you were instrumental in helping me pass. And my question is there anything more collaboratively we could be doing to bring all stakeholders in on that particular piece to make sure that we can create a disconnect so that if there's a regional problem, we can break the circuit, so to speak?
Well, we collaborate with with our partners in the suburbs, honestly, probably on a daily basis, especially where we border them. But there's probably something regionally that we can do as far as narcotics enforcement is concerned, because when you look at it, while Chicago is the hub of activity for that heroin problem that has already been described, we're not experiencing the uptick in overdoses that the suburbs are. Believe it or not, we're the hub, but the greatest impact is happening outside the city, is what we've been able to figure out. And this is a national problem. We were in D.C. talking about this some time ago. So perhaps something with regional narcotics enforcement is something that we could formalize, but I'd have to drill down and make sure that it's the way that we need to do it. Let's put it that way. I know that we do collaborate on a regular basis, but what we could do from a bigger perspective as far as the suburbs heroin issues, there's probably some things that we could do.
Okay, thank you, Superintendent. Representatives Cassidy, Necritz, and Mitchell with 1 question each.
Thank you. I have to start off, Mr. Mayor, by thanking you for going directly to something that has had me in this conversation from the beginning, which is the impact on people's lives beyond what happens in court and what happens with the arrest, and that is that question of collateral consequences, how this follows you. So I'm thrilled to hear part of your motivation, the drop from felony to misdemeanor is about that, but a misdemeanor is a significant impact on someone's life as well, and you cited some of those impacts, housing and work and all of those pieces. There are over 70 local ticketing laws around the state with varying amounts, varying fine levels, and part of the motivation behind this effort for many of us who've been carrying bills like this is to level that playing field. So it doesn't matter what you look like or where you live, you're going to face the same response, and that's something that's deeply important to me. But if we are talking about decriminalization, we also need to be talking about those collateral consequences and making sure that these tickets don't become part of your record as well. So my compound question, to comport with the chair's idea of us having one question, is
Objection.
do you envision a number of tickets as a limit, or is this an unlimited ticket as it is in the, I believe it is in the city. There are increased fines with multiple tickets, but I don't believe there's a cap on the number of tickets in the city. And would you support an effort that ensured that these tickets were not then something that would follow you and have those harmful impacts on your future?
I think that we should examine what happens if somebody gets 10 or 15 or 20 tickets. But by the same token...
But not 2 or 3?
Not 2 or 3. Because let's realize that it's generally about an addiction. And knowing people growing up who had substance abuse problems, you know, they had a social issue. They didn't have a criminal issue. The social issue resulted in them having a criminal issue. So I think that that should all be examined. A fine schedule, and what happens when you get to a certain level. Because if the treatment is in keeping, and probably everybody here knows people who have gone through treatment, relapsed, gone through treatment, and relapsed, and gone through treatment, and relapsed. There's probably other options that are out there. But something needs to happen. It can't just be you keep getting tickets and, you know, you get more tickets. So I would endorse that. I presume that would be a
But there is no limit on the city level, though, right, currently?
No, I don't think, no.
Okay. And I will say to one piece on the addiction question, I don't think that there's much scientific basis for marijuana being an addictive substance. So, but I hear what you're saying. I do hear what you're saying, but marijuana is not Coke. And so perhaps if we looked at it more in terms of, you know, we don't have a limit on the number of tickets you get for public intoxication or something like that. Not that we're talking about smoking in public, let me be clear. But I believe that we do need to, more than anything else, address this question of collateral consequences. And Mayor, you appear to have an answer too.
Well, you know, again, without having the details of what your overall legislation is, I think the guiding principle is what's important here, which is how to recalibrate the criminal justice system to deal with the public safety challenges we face, whether it's suburbs, downstate, or the city, away from what it has been historically, where both the individual, the criminal justice system, and the prison or jail population and costs are not really being applied to the challenges we're facing from a public safety standpoint. So if you said to me, would it be 2 or 3 or 15? I'm
not asking for that. I'm asking for the principled position, which I think you've already stated, and you and I have shared, that it shouldn't have collateral consequences.
Right. The basic point is, if you have a minor possession, how do you go on in your life and get either the education, apply for student aid, or the employment opportunities so that you're not held back from what was a minor possession with now a developed and established criminal record, and then all the other consequences that come from that when the criminal justice system is trying to actually focus on what it needs to focus on and not have an individual tarred for the rest of their lives in a series of activities, whether it's a home or housing, rather, employment or education, that are all essential to moving on.
So your intention is for these tickets to not have that consequence.
Correct.
And the devil is in the details.
Right. Exactly.
And I am looking forward to those detailed conversations. Thank you.
My objection would have been sustained, Representative. Representative Neckrits, then Representative Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome. Good to see everyone. Appreciate your being here today. I'm not a member of this committee, but I have a great interest in it. And I think one of the goals of this has always been to provide a very data-driven approach to the solutions that we come up with. So you mentioned earlier that burglary is a crime associated with marijuana, and I think you said that
with narcotics.
Okay, with narcotics. That's a data point that I have not come across. So if there's data, we have data to back that up, that would be great. Okay. And I also look forward to working, you know, as you indicated, with the city to be part of the solution on this. Will you be promoting a data-driven approach to the kind of issues that I would agree with Representative Duncan gave rise to this, which is with regard to the mandatory minimums?
Well, look, I mean, I'm hoping that what you will do and what the whole approach here will deal with it in a comprehensive way. Narcotics are a piece of this. Low-level possession is a piece of this, rather than dealing or distribution, and also dealing with the violent crimes that are serious as it relates to making sure that we have the public safety we need.
And we certainly want to do that. We just want to do it in a data-driven method.
Sure.
I think. Thank you.
Representative Mitchell to finish off.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Commissioner, for coming. This is an issue that's very important to me and other members of this committee, and have worked on kind of the issue of marijuana decriminalization for some time. So two-part question, so prepare your objection, Mr. Chairman. On the ticketing side, both you, Mr. Mayor, and you, Superintendent, have referred to this as being optional. I want you to drill down on that a bit for us, if you don't mind, because if the data says that other collateral crimes related to this, whether that be burglary, retail theft, whatever it is, have in fact gone down as ticketing has gone up. I don't understand why we wouldn't have the ticket be mandatory, at the very least presumptive, unless there were aggravating factors or some sort of probable cause. Second piece was the racial disparities aspect that was mentioned earlier. You guys mentioned that you loosened the requirement on government IDs. I'd be curious as to what that requirement was. And as a second part to that, is it that
third part, Mr. Chairman?
So technically it is a third part.
For the record, Mr. Chairman, does the panel get to object?
Compound was a better choice. So as I'm sorry, the third part of my compound question. Thank you, Representative Cassidy.
2A, 2B.
Is it that the ticketing disparities have gone down, or have the disparities that we commonly see with marijuana arrests also gone down? So three-part question. Thank you.
So I'm going to work backwards.
Sure.
I'm not positive what you mean by the ticketing versus arrest. They go hand in hand.
Sure.
So in other words, if they're not ticketed, they're arrested. And if they're arrested, they're not
So
ticketed.
let me try to clarify.
So ticketing has gone up.
Okay.
And as a result, the percentage of individuals, whether they're Latino, African American, or Caucasian, or generally about a third, where there was a higher percentage of African Americans and Latinos who were being arrested based upon the fact that they didn't have a government-issued ID.
So I understand that. So what I guess I'm saying is, so I know initially there was something I saw cited said something like 90% of people were still being arrested rather than ticketed for possession of low levels of marijuana. I assume those numbers have come down. What I guess I'm saying is, we have this bifurcated option where you either get a ticket or you get arrested. And what I'm saying is, it sounds like for the people who are getting ticketed, that racial disparity has closed to a third, and a third, which is what drug use is. On the arrest side, I guess I'm asking, is that also
No,
a third,
that's what we're referring to.
Okay, so you're
saying
saying
both. There was a higher
both.
percentage of folks who were being arrested based upon not having a government ID, which was causing a racial disparity. Now, the arrests and the ticketing has both leveled off.
They have both leveled off. Okay,
Correct.
Thank you. So that was part one. I know you said you were working backward. The other question was about, you said you relaxed that requirement for a government ID. So how does that process work now, I guess is what I'm saying. So if someone doesn't have a government ID, how do you identify them? I'm asking for guidance of the committee so that if we were to implement, say, a ticketing process,
We'll get you
to
the lawyer requirements that will drill down and make it very clear for you.
And then the first question, working back to part one, was this has been mentioned by you guys as being optional, and I'm trying to understand the why, given that, and you obviously have worked on the street and run the police department. If I'm an officer, I would have concern if I have the option to arrest or to ticket, just on, for all things within all righteousness, I might say, let me just arrest this person to be safe. Why wouldn't we say that the ticket was mandatory or the automatic presumption?
Let me try and answer that with a hypothetical, because it's not something that can be easily defined. Let's say, for instance, you catch somebody coming out of a residence, right? And you believe that they're actually committing a burglary, but you honestly are a little bit sketchy on it. You can make sure that they're properly identified by arresting them and fingerprinting them before they walk away. Whereas if you're issuing a ticket, there's going to be a question as to whether or not that's the right person. And I'm just making this up, by the way. Somebody could be arrested for gang loitering, in which case that they would be, and if they're in possession of cannabis, then they would be prosecuted for that also, rather than giving a ticket. So it could be a lesser included offense at the same time.
Representative, as the mayor here, when we were doing this, this is now 2 years ago, there wasn't a lot of data. So mandating that it just be ticketed versus the optionality was, I thought, the right response from a public safety. We were basically, I wouldn't say going in uncharted waters. It wasn't as clearly defined now that we are 2 years later where we are. You'll draft the legislation. We'll work with you on it. We think the optionality up to the law enforcement community gave them the judgment at the point. Mandating it, I didn't think it was the right way to go from the city council perspective and the mayor's perspective. Giving the police officers who are on the ground at the scene at the moment that choice was the right way to go. We're now 2 years into it, and remember, 2 years ago, this was totally new. People were just beginning to discuss it around the country.
And can I just be clear that where an arrest is made, it has to be justified, and we record it. So that number that you're concerned about, I don't know what it is, but it's probably around 1% or 2% of the actual enforcement. So we have data that shows why people are arrested versus given a ticket, which is how we came up with the obvious issue of no government ID was the category that was the driving factor in why people were being arrested. So it's a very, very, very low percentage that you're referring to, because we make people justify it, because the policy is to keep the officers on the street and not to give people criminal histories, and that's the goal.
Sure. No, I understand that. I want to make sure we're most effective, so I just want to make sure I heard you correctly, Mr. Mayor. The optionality was to make sure that we could do this in a data-driven way, but the idea of it being presumptive is not a deal breaker for you. It would be a devil's in the details conversation.
We got to work. I'm giving you my proposal, and I know you're not going to just take them and Xerox them. So we're going to work through the details.
That was actually our plan. Thank you.
I was going to say,
well,
Mr. Mayor, unfortunately, that's what got us into this.
I would prefer he not Xerox it.
That was a joke for the record.
Mr. Mayor, last question for you, the superintendent. I was asked to ask this. Have you seen any spike in...
Does that mean that's not your question?
Spike in the use of synthetic marijuana. There was a murder a couple weeks ago where a gentleman was on synthetic marijuana, and it caused him to, unfortunately, be responsible for the killing of his children in another state. Superintendent, have you noticed any uptick in this issue in Chicago?
I'd have to check back with my narcotics folks,
okay.
But I believe that over the last few years, we've seen an influx of it. As a matter of fact, about 2 years ago, we had probably the largest seizure that I've ever seen, where it was something like, a ton of synthetic marijuana that we confiscated. So anecdotally, I could tell you yes, but I'd have to go back and check to make sure that that's the case. Anecdotally, yes, we've seen it. But as far as causing violent crime, I'm not sure that we've made that connection like the case that you're referring to.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, thank you for being here. Like I said, I think it was important for you to come and talk to us.
I want to thank the committee, I want to thank the members, and I want to say for asking some very difficult questions, challenging historic presumptions and assumptions that have built up over the years in the criminal code, recalibrating the criminal code to apply to the challenges we have and not to the challenges we once thought we had. And we've tried to do that in a city level where we had the jurisdiction, and it has resulted in areas, at least on cannabis, more ticketing, more officer time on the street, more officer time on the street in the communities that impact it. But I want to, well, not a number of questions were towards the commissioner. We have then also reapplied our resources both to after school, summer jobs, domestic violence shelters in places that have an impact. And so as you make certain changes, as resources are freed up, applying those to drug rehabilitation, drug prevention, would be a smart way and consistent with what we have done from a comprehensive approach, not that we're effective, and then applying our resources to dealing with gun violence. So I compliment you and the process of the committee and the committee members.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Commissioner. Senator Nolan in the chair.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.